So, welcome to the Kickstart podcast, where we highlight the stories of how professionals kickstarted and navigate their successful careers. My name is Preston, and on this episode, we have the pleasure of hosting someone who has an impressive career from working at high-level sales roles to building and investing into a variety of fast-growing companies. Currently, he is the CEO and founder of Revv Up that is building the future of car ownership. Nate, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Preston. Sorry, obviously it wouldn't be a Zoom meeting without some kind of technical issue.
Not a problem. So Nate, thanks again for being on. And for those that don't know who you are, would you mind sharing a high-level summary of your background real quick?
Sure. So I'm from the Bay Area originally. I grew up out there. I kind of, drank the Silicon Valley water for a long time. I went to school there. I went to UC Berkeley. And then when I graduated, I went and worked in real estate finance for a little bit. And I kind of, after like a year and a half, I figured out that a glorified monkey could do my job. And I was really interested in working more on like with tech, just because it combined a lot of creativity with business, which I loved. And I started a company with a couple other guys and like kind of everything that could go to do, a lot of things not to do. And then I went and worked at a company called Building Connected, which was building a two-sided market. I was the first non-engineering hire there. When I joined, there were 5 people and we grew to 250 in like 4.5 years. We had 3 different product lines. I ended up leading our sales teams for all 3 of those product lines. I worked really closely with our product teams to develop new product, new features, things that would actually help us sell more. We grew that business. It was a freemium model. So we grew the business from 0 to $10 million in revenue in basically 3 years. And then the company was sold to Autodesk, which most people know for making like architecture engineering software. Their core product is AutoCAD, which a lot of people are familiar with. And they bought the company, which was a really interesting thing to go through, but they bought the company for $275 million. We had raised like 57 million around there. And I stuck around at Autodesk for about a year and a half, which was, it's certainly its own experience of being at a very large corporation, just super different than the sort of typical kind of startup world. That's like big tech. And then I really got the itch to get back into like building. I had looked at, some earlier stage companies and wanted to kind of be a lot more in control of my own destiny, so to speak. And in 2019, my wife and I leased a car. We had ended up having a good experience with a car dealer, but we started by having not a great one. And it just sparked a lot of my interest for a number of different reasons. But we basically we were really interested in like how the experience could be made better. And I started to get really deep in research on that. And so the way that I kind of operate with my tech lens is just to understand where like the highest frequency of operation is happening. And that's really happening at the dealership level. And so there's a much longer journey that I can tell you about and of like how we got to where we are today with the product perspective, from the product perspective. But early, I was just doing a ton of research with dealers on like where they needed the most help, where they felt like their business could improve, a lot of those things. And that led us down a path that got us to where we are today, where we're building the first consumer-driven auction for dealers to buy cars directly from consumers. So that's where we are today. There's a whole ton that we can unpack there, and if you want to, and yeah.
That was a wonderful high-level narrative of your career, and I really appreciate that. But before we dig into Revv Up, your current company, and I would love to unpack a lot of what you said.
Sure.
For a lot of the listeners in our audience, so you, after college, you went to real estate finance. And I think that's something that a lot of people do, right? They go into finance, they go into investment banking, some go into consulting. And so for your experience, like how was that transition to get out of that world into into the tech world? Did you just cold apply to companies? Were you headhunted? Was it through your network? And what sort of maybe transition or ramp up period were there, if there was any?
I had met somebody who had started companies before, and he and I worked on a bunch of different ideas. I said we learned a lot of things not to do. So we built a product without doing this was in 2011, 2012, right? So we built a product without doing any user testing. which was stupid. We were like, we're, Steve Jobs, and this is just like what needs to exist. Now, granted, the idea, I think, like, I'll tell you what it was, and you'll probably laugh, which is that we were building a social network. This is in 2012. We built a social network for people to share photos and videos, and then they could buy things that were in those photos, videos.
Mm.
Good business generally. I mean, that's what Instagram is today.
Makes sense.
Sadly, that's not what sadly that's not what happened for
Mhm.
us. But I mean, our niche where we started was really within action sports. I
Mm.
grew up doing that, and those people are like kind of gearheads. So it just didn't take off. And like from there, you know, and like kind of breaking into tech, like I kind of just had this crash course on things to do, things not to do, blah, blah, blah. And because of that, I was in this fortunate position where, for better or for worse, like I had a good story of,
Mhm.
I'd started a company, it didn't go as planned. We did some friends and family fundraising.
Oh, nice.
And so getting into tech like kind of made sense, but I didn't have a lot of experience. So, I mean, at the time, like I did do a lot of cold outreach. There was a lot less noise then than there is now. Like it was harder to find people's email addresses, which I was really good at. And I emailed a bunch of founders, and I ended up finding the place that I worked at because of a headhunter, actually. And I mean, look, a good lesson is like not to not like judge a book by its cover, but just not to make any assumptions. Like I was really not that interested in like, oh, construction tech company. Like, I'm not really that keen on it. And I really loved it. Like it was super interesting. There's a ton of companies now that are doing construction tech, and there was just not as much verticalized software in, 2014 as there is now. So I think that there's a lot of different ways to get in. I think about, and my advice to people on like when they're looking to sort of career change is that your options as an individual is like you're either ready to sort of like learn, like you're trying to pick a company where you can like just learn, and like you're in a role where it's going to teach you a lot, like you might not like it, but it's like going to teach you a lot. Two is that you want to be at a company where like the company is just going places, which is kind of number one. And like the third thing that's like the best of both worlds is that you're in this role and position that's like sort of maybe feels like you have a lot to grow into, where you can like do a ton with the role and you really like the company. And that's kind of what ended up happening for me, like just by sort of dumb luck. When I joined, like I said, there were 5 people, and so I was the sixth person. And then like we kept growing and growing, and then we hired more people, and they just kept giving me more and more responsibility, and like it ended up being like really great.
I think that's everyone's dream to do when they find a new job, right? To kind of grow with the rise of a company. And was this the company that ended up getting acquired at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Wow. And so
Yeah.
how was that experience? I mean, that's also something in the technology industry that people aspire to be part of as well. It's very glamorized, high profile acquisitions. You read it in the news all day, you see shows about it on TV and movie and different platforms. So for you to actually go through it, like what was it like?
There are a lot of different types of acquisitions, right? I think that where we raised $57 million, we were acquired for 275. So in terms of like an outcome, it was a really good outcome, just like plain simple, right? This wasn't like WhatsApp where, they had 20 some odd people or 30 some odd people, and they had like not really raised any money, and then they got acquired by, they raised $100 million or something like that, and then they got acquired for 19 billion. Like that's like a totally like outside of regular sort of normalcy kind of thing. So that's different. So this was a little bit more straight down the middle acquisition, and like look, it was wild. I don't know how else to say it, right? Like with certain acquisitions, you can't actually like the executive team, and oftentimes it might just be the founders, can't actually legally say anything until the deal is penned. And that was like the case with us. So we came in one day to work, and like they literally were just like, congratulations. There was like champagne sitting, like people literally had no idea what was going on. It was weird. So that was definitely odd for a lot of people. Like I had some inclination that something was happening, perhaps. And then we had like, the news kind of got broken. It was just like a surprise. I think that it's, you go through these phases like emotionally with this, right? And everybody's is very different. So when you think about the growth of the company, like when I started, there were five people. And for me, and like those people that were early, like it was more than a job, right? Like it just was. Then you get to, there are different like kind of cliques that I think about, right? So then there's like 10, you're still this core group. Once you get to like 25, then you start to get people who are still hungry and they're excited to make an impact and stuff, but you start to specialize with your roles a little bit more. So you get from 25 to 50, you double the size of the company. People care, but now you're really hiring people who like, this is a job to them, right? They were at other jobs before. And then you go from 50 to 100, and then really you start to like accelerate even further. And I haven't been at a company that has like accelerated really fast past, 250 people necessarily. We were kind of merged with other companies that were like large orgs. So we went from basically being a 250 person company to kind of a 1,200 person company within a 10,000 person company, which was definitely very different. But the, the majority of the people that we had been hired in the last year. So we hired like 100 people in a year, which is a lot of people. But I mean, like the feeling was it's just kind of interesting, right? You go through this wave of emotion. For me, it was like, it was a lot more than a job for me. I was kind of like living and breathing that. And that was like what I had. I, wasn't married. I didn't have kids. Like, I mean, now I do have those things. So it's like totally different, right? And for a lot of people, it was just a job. Maybe they had joined a year prior and they were like, wow, well, these things kind of happen, right? So certainly in San Francisco, that's kind of the like allure, and certainly was at the time of being there and working there. So, for me, like, I think that it was a total roller coaster of emotion, a lot of unknowns of like what happens once we get integrated with the larger org. What does this actually look like? And, there are a lot of complexities to how that all happens. So it totally depends, like getting acquired versus getting merged, what stage you're at. This was like a kind of classic run of the mill acquisition, and like people made some money. They treated the people who they acquired well. They didn't, let anybody go. So it wasn't like, sometimes companies get acquired and then they just, lay everybody off, or they just shut the product down or whatever they do, right? And so the products were still there. Everybody got a job. They, gave a role to every single person, whether you liked the role or not. It's hard to say.
Perfect. No, thank you for that, Nate. So once the acquisition happened, like how much longer did you kind of stick around until you decided, hey, like I want to do something different?
I was there for a year and a half. They find monetary ways to incentivize you to stay. And some people stayed longer. I didn't. I mean, transparently, like, and I don't want to say anything bad about that. Like, I didn't like love the role that I was in. I'm not sure that I would have stayed anyway, because I just don't know that, my MO is to like work at a 10,000 person company.
Mhm.
I like to be in the driver's seat. I like to be able to like have a seat at the table, and I didn't have those things. And I started to poke around. And so really in 2020, I started to do a lot of research, and that's when I started to get excited about automotive. I've always liked cars, but I've never been like a crazy car nut. I haven't been like a car dealership nut, but in thinking about like what was next and the problems that there are to solve, I really felt like if I was going to do something in construction tech, even though it was a nice story, oh, I worked in construction tech for 6 years. At the end of the day, like I still had to start from square one with like figuring out and understanding if I was like, oh, I want to help make payments better. Like I still had to start at square one. There's still a lot of people that I, knew, but it's like, how much does that matter necessarily? And so I got more and more interested in the dealership space. I found more and more opportunity there, and that's where I ended up.
How much of your experience trying to launch and build prior businesses and then joining your construction tech company, going through it through rapid growth, even to manage to stick around through an acquisition, how much of that was actually helpful for you when you decided to then build something on your own?
I mean, it's really hard to put a value on it because it's just insanely valuable. Like I really admire people who haven't like gone through the process and can figure it out for themselves because they're much smarter than me. But I learn from doing and learn from experience. And so when you get to see and have those at bats, then it just makes the process a lot easier for yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's just like you just feel like you have the cheat codes. There's just no other way to say it, right? It's like I just feel like I have a lot of the answers. Now, I feel like I have a lot of the answers because we're doing things that I'm used to doing, right? And so I think that that's a really critical component as well. Like I led sales and go to market for us when we had like roughly 10, when there's roughly 10,000 general contractors in the US. There's roughly 10,000 dealerships in the US, and they're all like geographic based. So it's just like a lot of similarities. So if I
Mhm.
was going and doing something completely different, then yeah, like I would have a lot more to figure out. So you try to find those things that are kind of the parallels that you find the parallels, and then you can kind of just try to lean in really hard on those. And then there's just places where you don't have the answers and you try to hire the right people,
Mhm.
or figure it out yourself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, if you have a good head on your shoulders, you can most likely figure it out. But if you had the prior experiences, that can certainly help just accelerate everything, right? When you kind of make that
Totally.
decision. So, all right, let's talk about Rev Up. So it clearly stems from a personal problem. I mean, you and your wife and your family own a car. You went through that whole process. It sparked something inside, and then you started doing research, talking to dealerships. So at this point during your research, was it just you, or did you have like another co-founder at this time?
It was just me.
Oh.
I just started to poke around. I started to ask dealers like what problems they have, this, that, and the other. And so the whole thing with research is just being open-minded, asking open-ended questions. We found that there was a lot of opportunity in service. So like fixing cars, basically annual maintenance, that kind of stuff. But for dealerships, the challenge that we had, because we actually ended up launching a product with that, the challenge that we had was that when you build a SaaS tool, you're dependent. It's especially hard if like that tool is interfacing with their client. Our whole goal was how we could make the end client's experience better, the people who own cars. That was really where I started my research. Where I was like, I had a negative experience. I ended up having a positive experience with another dealer, but I generally had a negative experience to start with. How can I make that better? And so my whole thought was, if I can impact people who are at the highest frequency, which is car dealers, then perhaps I can actually make the experience better. And what we figured out was that we could dictate more dealership behavior if we actually went and found them the customers first, because then we could really like leverage the dealers.
Mhm.
Like it created more of a where we were creating so much value for them that we could kind of push them to do the things that we know are really good for customers. And perhaps high level, an answer to your question of like how we kind of got to where we are, where what the research told us. But like you start by asking a lot of open-ended questions and you kind of narrow them down more and more. And then as we released a product again, we kind of like you open yourself up to even more questions of, is this the right thing that I'm building? Is it not? What works, what doesn't work, why, etc. And
Mhm.
those, can be very soul-searching questions.
So you're asking a lot of questions, and for someone who obviously has a really strong like sales and business and just strategy background, once you've really kind of understood that you're building or you want to build a software product, right? And then you not being an engineer, did you hire your first engineer very quickly? Did you find someone with technical background that ended up being like a CTO? Like how did
Yeah.
that happen?
So I worked with another person who was a CTO. We worked on the first product together, and then there's a whole like, sort of long story that we don't need to get into, but we basically parted ways and we set up a search at the end of really at the middle of last year, and found our current CTO, Mike, who had been at Birchbox. But like, look, early stage, like a lot of things just kind of don't work out. There's a lot of different reasons for it. Everybody's trying to find their place, and sometimes things just like don't work, and there's no hard feelings about it. And that's kind of how I feel about it. And like we have a really solid team now. So the general thinking is like you always need a technical leader when you're building a technical product. It's very, very challenging to just like contract that. We have Mike Mike has, been around the block for a while. And, it's been fantastic. So we have like a larger engineering team. We've got 3 other engineers in addition to Mike. And like, it's just super important, right? You need quality control on what you're building, when you're releasing it, syncing up on cycles, and all those things are just super, super important. So you start, and we started like early days by hacking a lot of things together. We continuously tried to test things with as like little technology as possible before like leaning in and building something that was going to be a lot more intense.
And then at a certain point, you develop something that got some traction, got a little maybe,
Yeah.
right? And then you're like, wow, this is a real thing. And then did you kind of put your heads together, create like an official team or partnership, and then you went off to the VC world to kind of raise some funds to help grow?
Yeah. So the story. So at the end of 2020, we had this initial hypothesis, right, that we were going to make a like service better for dealers, and it was going to make it better for customers. And at the time, at the market was super hot, right? And so Crosslink Capital did the Series A for Building Connected, which was the last company that I was at. I'd gotten to know them over the years, especially because I had led product teams, or sales teams for different products at Building Connected. And then after we got acquired, I'd been speaking with them, and they were like, hey, what are you thinking about doing next? And I told them, and they were like, oh, we've invested in a couple of auto tech companies, and why don't you come basically be like an entrepreneur in residence for us, leave Autodesk, be a entrepreneur in residence for us, work on your idea, pitch it to the partnership, and then we'll fund the company if we really like it. And so that's what happened. They were like, listen, we know this is just an idea. You've got some really good early data points. And here's, they led a $1.85 million round, like a pre-seed round. And that was awesome. Like they're great capital partners. And then fast forward, we had kind of like weaved through and found some different things that worked and didn't work. Here's what we learned. Here's like what we think is like the future and what's next. And so that became really crystallized for us, 10 or 12 months after they had done the initial funding. And so we were thinking about, okay, what's next for us? Like, we need to go and now raise more money. And they, led another round of funding for us, which was $3 million, which we closed in April of this year. So we raised 4.85 total. It's kind of like, we think about this as like one kind of like larger seed round that they've led. And they're just an amazing, amazing partner for us. They got really excited because at, the end of last year, we had some very strong early data points. So we were finding that, we had this thing where we were like, okay, we built this product for service. People are coming to us to help get, their car serviced. They're giving us feedback. They really want to find a better way to like value their car, figure out if they should sell the car, etc. What do they do? Right. And so like we basically piecemealed together a lot of sort of hacky pieces of technology. We used some stuff with Typeform, used a bunch of contractors on Upwork, and effectively said, let's see if we can get people the best price to sell their car. We'll do this all via email. And the response rate from people as we like advertised this a little bit on Facebook was incredibly high. So there was a super, super high need. Like the point to me that like flew off where things kind of flew off the shelves was that we put this really high hurdle in front of people. We made them fill out a 51 question form about the condition of their car, and 45% of people filled it out. So the like conviction that we had was really strong because people were so compelled to like go through this journey because of the value proposition that we had. So that was, really a kind of lightning bolt moment for us. And then we created the product, we launched it, and we got to the point where we were getting, we built a consumer facing product and like really had like launched right when we closed our round. And so, yeah, the order of operations was like a little bit all over the place, but it was kind of like typically with funding, it's like get data, have a good team, like have conviction around one hypothesis, and then like do and go fundraise. And then, markets had kind of like collapsed a little bit. And so we started to think about like, okay, how do we now rethink our model where we just run a little bit more lean, which I actually really like. And then, like it's kind of just been focused on product and building product. We like had some really good tests. Now we know what we need to build. And so you go through this cycle.
Wow, that's really, really cool. So after you got the first seed, Nate, how many people did you guys initially hire on the team before you raised again?
We had 5 people.
Wow.
Total, including me. And then again, sort of the short story is just that like there were a couple different reasons why we downsized, and then there were just 2. And then we added Mike, which was 3, and we ramped back up. Like, I guess, being vague about some of these things is like a little bit challenging as sort of on a public forum as well. But like we just had some HR issues with a couple people, and like that's always tough, but that's kind of like just the reality. And we had HR issue with one, which you really have to like nip in the bud. And then we had hired somebody who was just too junior for kind of what we needed. And you have to be realistic with like hiring, right? Like, and I think maybe I don't know if people talk about this that often on your podcast, but you can make bad hires, and like you can make hires that might do well within a much larger organization. And sometimes people need more structure and training and support. And at a small company, we're 7 people now, it's still a small company. Like you need people to be autonomous and be able to go execute. You can't, hold their hand as much through things. So, not a knock on that person at all. It's just sometimes it's a bad environment.
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you being open, Nate. And this is exactly what we want to showcase. A lot of times people have this preconception of what a founder is like, and they just assume everything's easy and a straight shot. And what you're sharing is it takes a lot of grit, some creative problem solving, persistence every single day. And a lot of times things won't go your way, but you have to adapt, figure it out,
totally,
get back up and move forward. And so now you have a really great, it seems like a small team. You got some really great feedback. You're building the product, which is obviously very, very exciting. And congratulations on your most recent round. So even after kind of going through that a little bit, and like what's your kind of philosophy of hiring and recruiting now? Like, why do you think your company Revv Up is something that people should kind of really seriously look into if they're looking for a new job opportunity, especially in an industry where there's so many other early stage companies out there, right? So like what's an X factor of you guys, or something that you feel like makes you special or stand out?
I think that there's 3 things that I like to sort of really hone in on. So one is the problem that we're solving, and I'll come back and give more details on this. So one's the problem that we're solving, 2 is a team, and 3 is the impact that each person gets to have. So most people have this concern with like, what if the company goes belly up, or am I going to be left high and dry? And like, I think almost regardless of role, like I don't think that for a lot of roles is like necessarily the case. Like I have not met one engineer who's like said, I just can't find a job. Like I think about like the sort of risk reward of being early and being on a small team, if you're ready for it, is the third thing that I mentioned, which is impact. So you can have a massive impact on a really small team. Like you turn out features that can impact a lot of people. Like you get to deploy things really quickly. You can like help, and that doesn't matter if you're an engineer or like working in support or marketing. Like how you impact an organization and what you get to do, like you get to see the fruits of your labor very, very quickly. I love doing that. Like I think that's a lot of fun. And that happens when you're 7 people, when you're 70 people, or 700 people, right? It happens at different scales. So impact is one thing that I mentioned. So I guess I'll work backwards. So impact is one thing. The team is the second thing that I think is really important. So, I mean, I gave you my background. I think that having the right team in place that understands what things are urgent, what's not, like how to prioritize, how to work on product, how to, go through a sales motion, just mature leaders rather than some of the horror stories that you can hear in the industry. Unfortunately, like I think that that's a big advantage for us. Worked in like the ad agency world for 10 years on the engineering side, and then was one of the early engineers at Birchbox, which a lot of people have heard of, as a direct to consumer company that had a lot of tech on the back end. And then he stood up a lot of engineering teams, from zero. So you add that with like, we've got some really seasoned engineers. We have one person who helps lead our, support and marketing efforts. We have somebody who I used to work with at my prior company on the sales side. And so it's a culture of collaboration, of getting better, of giving people candid feedback so that we can all improve, myself included, and just make something that really means something to a lot of people. So that leads me to like the last thing, which is that, what we're doing is helping people get we're helping people get the best price to sell their car. That means that they are coming to us because they believe that this is going to be the place where they could make or save the most amount of money. And the reason why this is important is that what people don't realize is that the average discrepancy between highest and lowest offer on cars is over 30%. So if you're actually going to go sell your car, if you don't get as many offers as possible on the car, perhaps obviously, then you could potentially leave a lot of money on the table. And for the average American, if you have, another $1,000 or $2,000 on the price of your car, like that's a meaningful amount of money. So in terms of like impact, I think that that's just a really, really huge benefit to joining our company in particular, because it means that like you get to actually impact almost every person in this country, because the average household owns 2 cars. So like this is the most important asset that people own, and more important than real estate, because more people actually own cars than real estate. There's 250 million cars on the road. There's a ton of drivers. Like everybody owns cars. Maybe not in New York City, but in the majority of the country, people own cars. So it's a combination of 3 things, right? It's like having a company mission that you're super excited about, working with a seasoned team that has really strong investors who have super deep pockets and have come time and time again to actually reinvest in the company. And then 3 is like having a really big impact day to day. You get to like actually see the fruits of your labor.
For sure. And for someone who talks to just tons of people every week and every month, I can completely attest to this as well. I think one of the reasons why people lean towards smaller, fast growth companies is the opportunity to have a lot more impact, to have a lot more ownership, to also have a seat at the table, work closely with founders like yourself and Mike, building something that is having a net positive impact on a lot of people. And so I think that's really, really exciting. What are your thoughts on just recruiting and just extending offers in this kind of market to not only get people in the pipeline, but to also close people? It's, if you've been in the tech industry, or if you're listening, you are in the tech industry, whether on the founder, hiring manager, or recruiting side, that this is a crazy market, very competitive. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of people ask for salaries much higher than, for example, pre-2020, right? So like for someone that's driving the ship, the captain of like a small company right now and try to navigate these waters, like how do you kind of think about that? And how do you approach that? Because on one hand, we also talk to many founders in a similar situation as you, Nate, that are struggling because they can't offer high salaries, they can't offer competitive salaries, or they're choosing to be stubborn and be like, we want to offer low salaries and attract people with the equity. So for someone that has a good number of core people right now on your team and looking to gradually scale in a smart way, like how do you approach everything, or how do you just think of that?
That's a great question. I think that for the right candidate, I think that a lot of founders can get too caught up in really minuscule differences in comp that end up meaning a lot more to the person than they do to like the company. And I'll give you an example of that, which is like, we cover 100% of people's healthcare. We have really good healthcare benefits. A lot of companies don't do that, right? Like they just don't, for whatever reason. And I think that's a little bit silly, like, especially when you look at the numbers, like it's not actually that big of a number, but yet, companies nickel and dime their own people. And then people get upset about it. They might leave, right? Like the difference between covering 80% and 100% of people and making employees come out of pocket might be the difference of $3,000 or $6,000 a year per employee, but like the replacement cost on that person could be super high. So it's, to me, it seems silly. So like when I think about this with candidates and comp, for the right people, like you want to flex for them and like make it worth it. We can't do, we can't compete with like cash salaries at, big companies, even though a lot of them aren't hiring right now. But so we try to keep it somewhat reasonable. But I tell employees when they join, like, look, it's much easier for us as we go and raise more money to level up cash comp than it is for equity. And when you think about orders of magnitude of difference and impact, I really think about that as being like equity, right? So
Mhm.
to me, that's like the biggest thing is like getting more equity, right? You want as an employee, like you want that early. So that's always my like advice to people. And in terms of how we stay competitive and present offers and navigate through this, like we're just trying to find the right people. I think that what can be really scary or hard is if you have one role and you're or maybe you've one opening today, and then for the same role you've opened in 3 months, and then you're interviewing and you find two people that you really like today. It's like, well, just try to find a way to hire both of them. I mean, it's like it's hard to do and it can be scary, but like you kind of need to do that. The guy that I used to work with who is working with me on sales, he kind of came into the market and was like available for hire earlier than perhaps I would have planned. What am I going to do? Not hire him? Like I could, but it's like a known quantity, right? So it's you have to think about these things in terms of trade-offs, and that's how I think about hiring. If people are going to do something really aggressive or ridiculous, then like yeah, it's hard to compete. There's certain times when you're like, okay, I can't pay like 50% out of our band for like an entry level engineer. I just can't, right? I'd love to, but I can't. We're not that place. So there's sometimes when it's like a little bit ridiculous, but it's like, you just wish them the best and try to get people close.
Yeah, you're always going to have those anomaly situations. But what I appreciated again from your response, it's really refreshing to hear from a founder such as yourself that's almost having a long-term outlook in recruiting than short-term. And what I mean by that is even actually with companies that are much larger, when it comes to recruiting, you can throw just money at it, right? You can throw money at the recruiting
Yeah.
machine. You can hire a ton of people. But then if you're not building the foundation correctly, to optimize retention long term, then
Yeah, you
like
lose.
it's a constantly sinking ship, right? Like you're
Yeah.
hiring people, but then the equal amount or the same amount of people are leaving. And so what I really want to spotlight here is that I think to see you thinking of recruiting like this is quite uncommon, especially from the founders I've spoken to in my all years working with different types of founders across all stages in New York. And to me, it's absolutely just refreshing. And it's great that you're thinking about things even like 100% benefits, which you didn't have to do. And
Yeah.
again, a lot of pre-Series A companies don't do that, not even close. And so I think adding on top of that, you doing whatever you can to stretch on the cash. And then, of course, I'm sure like fair equity. And then all the reasons you talked about before, like great leadership background, great investors, ownership, impact. I think as a package is as strong as it can get. And you
Well,
guys are
thank you.
now, and you guys are in New York City, right?
Yeah.
Which is one
Yeah.
of the most competitive tech markets in the country. So actually, that brings me to another question. So you're from California originally, and you worked
Yeah.
in California. So how is like the New York City tech market different in your experience than out in the West Coast?
Yeah. Great question. Well, thanks for all those high compliments. It's very nice. So like, I grew up in the Bay Area. I lived in San Francisco for almost 10 years. Like it's kind of funny. I mean, recruiting in San Francisco is certainly very challenging. Was probably is like slightly easier now, perhaps, maybe because there's like more remote companies. But I mean, look, the New York tech community has really been lifted by big companies that are out here, whether that's Facebook or Amazon or Google, right? Like that's somewhat recent. That's not like 10 years ago, that wasn't here, right? So the community was much, much, much smaller. So I think recruiting for that, we had a New York office at Building Connected, and recruiting was always challenging for that just because there's less in the market. I personally would always take a more competitive market where there's more talent in the market where you have to compete more versus like a market that's just like where there are just fewer people there.
Mhm.
So, that's definitely like how New York used to be. But now like it's really flourishing. There's a lot of people here, I think, with sort of this post-COVID world, people really want to like be in a city. If they want to be in people kind of will take one or two places, right? Where they're like, they either don't want to be in the city or they want to be somewhere where they can have more space, whatever it is. That's all fine and well. But I think that people, when they're thinking about like, for people who like really want to be in a city, like being in New York City is like, it's always been the place to be. But now post COVID, people are like, I really, if I want to be in a city, like I want to be in New York. So people
Mhm.
who are here are genuinely excited about being here. We have a hybrid model where people come into the office few days a week. Um, and like that level of collaboration is really great. So hiring here has been good. It's the pool of talent, like transparently, is like it's still not as big as the Bay Area. Just it's hard to unravel decades of experience of people going to Silicon Valley and sort of setting their roots there. Um, but there's a lot of talent. Like there's a lot more people who are here and who are moving here, and there's more VC activity here. And so I really like it. It's great. And it's certainly, I don't think has like been any slower than other companies where I like know the founder and know that they've been operating, at a similar size. So yeah.
A lot of people say that New York City, even though it might have a smaller talent pool, can compensate by transitioning their company to fully remote. So instead of like being limited to the New York City market, you can
Yeah.
reach out to anyone across the country. You mentioned that your team is hybrid. Is there kind of a thought process behind why you chose hybrid versus a company that's fully remote?
Yeah, there is. So, in thinking back on early days stuff, like I think that building a company is hard enough. So that's one piece. So it's like building a company is hard enough, period. Building a company where everybody's fully remote, I think is just even harder. So I'm trying to like find ways to make things not as hard. Being in person gives us the ability to collaborate with much greater ease. We can move a lot faster. Speed is super important. And, like, look, if somebody wants to go work in Portugal for a month, great, like go. I don't care. But I do think that the level of collaboration that we get being in person is a competitive advantage for us. Just sitting in front of a computer, working from home, being on Zoom calls all day, you miss out on a lot of the camaraderie, a lot of like learnings and takeaways that you might get from somebody who's in customer service, who's on the phone with a client, answering questions, or the salesperson. Those, you lose those things, and there's like so much inherent value to that I think that we have an opportunity, because we are not an existing company, to really build a culture around leveraging being in person to our advantage. And we give COVID tests to everybody, so they take a test before they come to the office, which is great. We're here 3 days a week. There's flexibility. I don't think that we're like being unrealistic about things, and we are hiring people who want to be here. And especially when you hire people who might be more junior, they need to have the ability to like learn things, learn things through osmosis, and then the ability to like, whiteboard and stuff. Like I don't want to see my coworkers just 4 times a year, like in quarterly offsites, right? Like that sounds great, but it's still just so like Zoom fatigue is real.
It really is. So what's in store for you guys into the future? So where your product is right now, if someone had a car and they want to sell it, right, that they can
Yeah.
maybe find you guys to maximize the return that they can get. So what maybe whatever you can share. So in terms of like the future roadmap, what can someone kind of expect
Yeah.
to see getting rolled out from Revv Up, or maybe
Yeah.
what is the overall mission of the company? Has that changed from day one?
Hmm.
Would love to
Yeah.
get your take on that.
Besides, I mean, I guess besides world domination, right?
Besides world
So,
domination.
so my thinking and my fundamental belief long term is that I think that the way that people transact around cars, which is the largest consumer segment in the country in terms of market, I think that the way that people transact around that is just backwards. I'm not saying that like dealers are bad. I'm saying that the way that transactions happen, I think, is backwards. And here's what I think is kind of weird. Let's say you want to buy a flight. You go to Expedia and you get prices on every flight to fly from, San Francisco to New York. If you want to, and that's because you're basically coming into a marketplace and saying, I have money that I want to spend and I would like to do that. at one of a number of different places. This is the thing that I want. And you could take the same thing and apply it to shopping or flights or hotels or any of these things, right? But somehow it's not built that way with cars. And it's like one of the largest, consumer purchases, sales, there's all these things that come around it. So my vision for the future is that there is a true marketplace where people can go to and say, I'm ready to make a big transaction or more than one, and I would like to get the best deal for me. And that means a number of different components. Today, it means, okay, that's to sell my car, but tomorrow it means I want to sell my car, I want to buy a new car, I want to get an insurance policy on that car, I want to get a warranty on it, I want to get a service plan. Like all of those things, a lot of people are just doing at one place, and they might not know what other options are out there. If these are really big dollar value transactions, and it's surprising to me that there aren't more marketplaces where consumers are driving the conversation, because the reality is that people are doing this anyway. We bought a car, we've sold a car, like you're managing this process anyway, and it shouldn't be so challenging. So that's the long-term vision.
So in other words, a destination for anything related to just car ownership and
Correct.
all the finances that kind of get related to that.
That's right.
If you're listening and that's not a mission that won't spark your excitement, I don't know what will. I mean, I think obviously people.
Well, it's only a $2 billion industry, so it's
we're talking.
$2 trillion industry. I was order of magnitude up. I was like, is that right? Maybe I haven't had enough coffee today. It's only a $2 trillion industry, so
So yeah, there is a little bit of an opportunity there.
We're trying to take a small slice of a very, very big pie. And I think I'm super excited about it. So
I think that's really exciting. And then, so how big is your team now?
So we're 7 people now. Hopefully we'll be, 10 people by the end of the year, maybe a little bit more, depending on how fast sales goes. And then it'll kind of be off to the races, I guess, we'll see.
And so I know we're running short on time, but I want to ask you, so as a founder and CEO of a venture-backed company, like what does your day-to-day look like? Like, do you have a routine, or is every day completely different?
That's a good question. I mean, look, I think that regardless of role, every day can be kind of different, right? So my primary focus is on managing a lot of the different pieces, which I really enjoy doing. So that means running product, running marketing, and then kind of co-leading sales. Like the guy that I used to work with is really stellar, and I can kind of like release him to go and do things as an extension of me. But I'm kind of trying to like just help in a bunch of different areas and figure out the things that I don't know, like our marketing, right? Like I don't know about that. And, so anyway, day to day does change, but there are some consistencies at every stage. So right now we're really focused on marketing. Like we've done a bunch on product. We're getting our marketing strategy going. Like we have a huge focus on TikTok, and then we, are getting a lot of our sales going, right? So a lot of the sales sort of motions are about, getting people into our pipeline. We're going to be going and visiting a ton of dealerships in person. So like, there's a lot of different components to all this, but it's really about like hyper focus on one or two areas and like getting those things really right and kind of continuing to move on to the next things until you have to like circle the wagon again.
Nate, real quick, I just have to ask you about this.
Yeah.
TikTok. So the reason why that's a shocker for me is a lot of companies, primarily their relationship with Facebook, Instagram is primarily through most likely paid social, right? Or some sort of form of that. Yeah. Why TikTok? The fact that you're able to, first of all, be aware of TikTok as a platform, and second of all, engage a platform like TikTok as a founder of a venture-backed company, I think that's super, super interesting, because a lot of people just assume that the average TikTok user are just, middle school, high school kids doing dances and pranks on each other, right? And so please, we'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on it. And again, it just goes to show like, you're thinking outside the box and you're not really following the typecast of a typical tech founder. And I love how, you're just trying new things, doing whatever you can, exploring all avenues to push Revv Up forward. And so You're the first person that I actually talked to of founders like TikTok. So I got to ask you about that.
Sure, yeah. I'd love to talk about TikTok. We should probably have another podcast on just TikTok.
Yeah, of course. Let's do it.
I forget how I got into like the world. Oh, I know what it was. I was talking with another guy who was a founder, and he was like, TikTok's pretty interesting. You should check it out. And I was like, said what you said. I was like, well, isn't TikTok just a bunch of, kids doing Fortnite dances? And he was like, no, it's really cool. And my wife had done some stuff with TikTok with her last business, and she was like, it's really interesting. So I was like, okay, I've now heard enough people who have, said something about it. So I should probably look at this. It's fascinating. I think that it's the most underappreciated channel. It feels to me like how Facebook probably felt in 2007 and how Google probably felt, in the early 2000s, because it's all structured around creators and creative and creators and discoverability of content. And so Instagram is about building a following. TikTok is about making content that some of your followers will see, but a lot of them won't, right? Just other people will see. So our whole thing is exposure. And our business is B2B2C, which means that we have to have a consumer facing brand.
Mhm.
Our brand needs to be visible to people, and the largest growing user segment of TikTok users is people who are 30 to 50 years old. So this whole misconception that it's just Gen Zers is totally bullshit. And even if it was, I wouldn't care, because it's a long-term strategy for us. But the reality is they still own cars. I mean, they do, right? A lot of people own cars when they're 18 or 16. So I don't really care.
Mhm.
And then the second piece is it's free. I mean, we're working with a TikTok consultant basically who's helping do some coaching stuff with us. So okay, great. So we'll figure that out. And then we're gonna do that for 2 or 3 months, maybe more. And then it's free. You can go viral, right? The whole thing is built around virality. I could go and have some posts that 1 million people see for free. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of my thinking about it, is it's free. Even if it wasn't free, so I post something and let's say 100 people watch it. If I post something tomorrow, it's not like with Instagram. The same 100 people watch it. That's bad. I want I get a new fresh set of eyeballs on my content every time.
Mhm.
So we're building this library of content, and I think that it's just a very, very fascinating platform that is not going anywhere.
I love it, Nate. You're preaching to the choir. I'm a huge fan of media and fascinated by the evolution of media, but most importantly, how companies can utilize media, all channels, correctly to boost their business. And
Yeah.
I think what really helped you here is, again, going back to your long-term perspective, right? If you're just looking for a win, 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 then people can just try TikTok for 2 days and then just quit. But you understand that TikTok, the main difference between that and Instagram, it's interest-based algorithm, right? So it's not just going to be showing the same thing over to your 5 friends. It's if it hits, you'll be hitting different people potentially every single day, and you get that. And again, it's completely free. And I think going back to media marketing, organic is the strongest form of marketing, but it takes the most time. And I think that can only happen if you have a long-term perspective. So again, full circle, I think it's cool. I think it's really, really cool.
Well, thank you.
That I'm talking to a founder who gets TikTok. So again, if you're listening to this, you're a founder right now, or
get on TikTok.
You love TikTok, get on TikTok. So Nate, I think I agree. We could totally talk much, much longer, but I do want to be respectful of your time, as you obviously have a real business that you got to run.
You do too, don't worry.
Instead of talking to me. But look, at the end of the day, I really appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your realness. That you are showing to the audience in just a matter of an hour, what your life is like as a founder, the ups and downs, but most importantly, reaching out, what it's like to grow a company, all the different trials you have to go through, and even what it takes for you to attract a really, really good team, but most importantly, how to retain them properly. And so there's a lot of things that you guys are doing that personally I'm very, very excited about. I just got my first car, so give me a couple years and I'll definitely be one of the users to go to Revv Up. But if people wanted to reach out to you, they want to learn more about Revv Up, they want to find you on TikTok, where can they find you?
So our TikTok is Hello Rev with 2 V's. We're actually going to be rebranding to Rev, not Revv Up soon. So that's a little teaser. They can email me, nate@getrevvup.com with 2 V's. There's like a form they can fill out on our website. But yeah, I mean, like, look, you could message me on LinkedIn or whatever. Like, I'm quite responsive. So please reach out. Would love to hear from people.
Perfect. And last question.
Yeah.
For anyone who's looking to build something of their own, to be a founder, or even that aside, for someone that wants a successful career within technology, like what is one advice that you can share?
That's a hard question. One piece of advice that I'd have to share. I think that the thing that I talk to some people about is just like, you got to remember that you're the CEO of your own career. So it's really important to find the right hill to climb. And like sometimes the traditional path of like whatever traditional job it was that you were thinking about, or something that seems like more risk averse, like it's okay to take risks, and it's usually a lot easier to like recalibrate, and it's not as bad as maybe, or scary as maybe it seems. So taking risks and calculated risks early is a really good thing to do, and it can pay huge dividends. Like you got to find ways to level up your experience in very, very big steps. So that's like what I always tell people.
Take calculated risks, back it up with action.
Yeah.
And shoot for the moon.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Nate, good luck to you and
likewise,
the team
thank you.
at Revv Up, and thank you again for spending time. And we'll certainly be excited to see how you and your team navigate these waters, and wish nothing but great success in the next couple of years.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Preston. I appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.